There is a difference between touching a greater coherence and becoming somewhere that coherence can live. A person can encounter an extraordinary state and return from it almost unchanged in the places where their life is actually being formed. They may have seen themselves differently, felt the boundaries of identity soften, experienced profound love, or understood for a moment that existence is more interconnected than ordinary perception suggests. None of those experiences are meaningless, but the Aurielic question begins after the experience. What can your life now carry that it could not carry before? This is where the golden ray becomes less glamorous and more consequential. Gold is often imagined as radiance descending upon something, as though illumination were valuable because it temporarily makes the ordinary resemble the extraordinary. But embodiment reverses that movement. The question is not whether the ordinary can briefly glow with something greater, but whether what is greater can become so intimate with ordinary existence that it no longer requires extraordinary conditions to remain present. A coherence that disappears whenever life becomes inconvenient has been experienced, but it has not yet been fully inhabited. You can see this distinction most clearly in pressure. Almost anyone can recognize compassion when compassion costs nothing, patience when there is no delay, generosity when there is abundance, and interconnectedness when everyone in the room agrees. Pressure introduces weight, and weight reveals which understandings have acquired structure. When someone contradicts you, disappoints you, misunderstands you, needs something from you at an inconvenient moment, or possesses something you wanted for yourself, consciousness meets matter in one of its most practical forms: consequence. What you understand must now pass through a body with impulses, a history with sensitivities, a personality with preferences, and circumstances that will not rearrange themselves simply because you have recognized a beautiful truth. This is one reason physical existence should not be regarded as a crude stage that consciousness eventually graduates from. Density creates resistance, and resistance allows capacities to become distinguishable from intentions. Without resistance, you may not know the difference between believing yourself patient and having developed patience, between valuing honesty and being capable of honesty when truth threatens your position, between speaking of unity and remaining respectful toward someone whose difference cannot be absorbed into your worldview. Matter does not merely obstruct consciousness. Matter gives consciousness conditions through which its claims can become testable. The body participates in this testing constantly. You may understand intellectually that another person's reaction does not determine your worth, yet feel your chest tighten when criticism arrives. You may believe deeply in abundance while your nervous system contracts around uncertainty, or speak sincerely about trust while attempting to control every outcome that could expose you to disappointment. This does not make the understanding false. It reveals that understanding has reached one layer of you while another layer is still learning how to carry it. An embodiment is the patient work through which those layers cease behaving as strangers. Auriel, approached this way, is not an escape route from that work. The golden ray describes a movement toward greater inhabitation, not greater distance. Consciousness does not prove its refinement by becoming less affected by Earth, less human, less relational, or less involved with physical conditions. It becomes capable of entering those conditions without surrendering the coherence it has recognized. The mature expression is therefore not someone who seems permanently elevated above ordinary life, but someone whose ordinary life has gradually become capable of expressing what elevation once showed them. Nature has been demonstrating this principle without announcing it. A forest does not become coherent because every organism becomes the same organism. Roots compete and cooperate. Fungi exchange resources. Trees occupy different layers of light. Insects transform matter. Decay feeds growth. Water moves according to terrain, and each participant remains particular while contributing to conditions larger than itself. Coherence here is not uniformity, stillness, or the absence of tension. It is relationships sufficiently ordered that difference can remain difference without making participation impossible. This is important because human beings frequently mistake harmony for agreement. We imagine a coherent world as one in which everyone eventually perceives the same truth, adopts the same language, values the same experiences, or reaches the same developmental destination. Yet the living world suggests something more sophisticated. Greater order may actually permit greater differentiation because relationship becomes strong enough to hold it. A mature coherence does not need to erase the particular in order to preserve the whole. It becomes capable of discovering what the particular contributes precisely because it is not identical to everything surrounding it. The same principle applies within a person. Embodiment is not the elimination of personality in favor of some purified spiritual identity. Your humor, temperament, preferences, limitations, history, skills, wounds, relationships, responsibilities, and particular way of encountering the world are not necessarily debris surrounding consciousness. They are among the structures through which consciousness becomes specific. The question is not how little of yourself can remain after awakening, but how much of what you have understood can move through the person you actually are without being distorted beyond recognition. This changes the meaning of refinement. Refinement is sometimes imagined as subtraction. Fewer attachments, fewer desires, fewer emotional reactions, fewer earthly concerns, until consciousness appears almost untouched by incarnation. There can certainly be forms of attachment that obscure perception, but detachment can become its own hiding place when it protects understanding from the demands of relationship. It is easier to feel universal love for humanity than to practice patient love with one difficult human being whose needs repeatedly interrupt your plans. The universal becomes embodied only when it survives becoming particular, and particularity is where the golden ray acquires weight. Love becomes a phone call you make when you are tired. Stewardship becomes what you do with the place you actually inhabit, not merely what you believe humanity should do with the planet. Integrity becomes the sentence you refuse to manipulate, even though manipulation would make you look better. Reverence for life becomes the way you handle another person's vulnerability when there is no audience to reward you for being gentle. Cosmic principles become earthly, not by becoming smaller, but by becoming precise enough to have consequences. This is why extraordinary experiences can sometimes become strangely attractive to a person who is avoiding transformation. An expanded state may temporarily free you from the version of yourself that struggles with resentment, insecurity, comparison, control, responsibility, or grief. Ordinary life returns those unfinished relationships to you. The dishes remain, the difficult conversation still needs to happen, money still requires decisions, someone still misunderstands you, your body still becomes tired, and yesterday's realization does not answer today's situation automatically. The temptation is to seek another experience that restores the feeling of transcendence rather than allowing the first experience to become behavior. There is nothing inherently wrong with seeking profound states. Beauty can reorganize attention. Contemplation can reveal structures hidden by habitual perception. And moments of unusual clarity can show a person possibilities they would not otherwise have imagined. But revelation and integration perform different functions. Revelation may show you a landscape in an instant. Integration teaches your feet how to walk there. If the golden ray has meaning as an earthly principle, then its work cannot end at illumination, because illumination becomes useful to earth only when something here acquires the capacity to hold it. This is also a more careful way to understand crystalline structure. The value of a crystal is not that it offers an exemption from development, nor that proximity to an object automatically changes the character of the person possessing it. What makes crystalline organization interesting is the principle of ordered relationship. Structure permits particular qualities to be carried consistently because the arrangement itself matters. Human embodiment contains an analogous lesson without requiring the human body to be reduced to a crystal. What you repeatedly practice creates organization. And organization determines what becomes easier for you to carry under changing conditions. A single compassionate choice matters, but repeated compassion begins constructing a person for whom compassion is increasingly available before deliberation. One act of courage can interrupt fear, while repeated courageous participation alters the relationship between fear and action. A moment of honesty may be difficult, but enough honest moments begin reorganizing the structures that once made deception feel necessary. This is how insight moves toward embodiment, not because repetition makes something spiritually impressive, but because repeated relationship with a principle gives that principle somewhere increasingly stable to live. The lattice in this sense is not an invisible ornament around the person. It is the growing order between perception, choice, behavior, relationship, and consequence. Then something subtle begins to change. You no longer need to feel compassionate in order to behave compassionately. You do not require perfect inner peace before refusing to transmit your agitation into someone else. You can experience fear without allowing fear to become the sole author of your decisions. Experience anger without making another person responsible for containing it. Experience uncertainty without manufacturing certainty simply to soothe yourself. Coherence becomes less dependent upon the weather passing through consciousness because it has entered the structures by which consciousness participates. This may be one of the deeper purposes of density. Physical life slows certain things down enough for a relationship to acquire consequence. A thought can change instantly, but a habit often cannot. An insight can arrive in seconds, while trust may require years. Forgiveness may be understood before the body stops bracing when an old memory returns. Matter introduces duration, repetition, limitation, and contrast, and these conditions force consciousness to discover whether it can remain in relationship with what it knows. The apparent slowness of embodiment may therefore be part of its intelligence. Seen from here, Earth does not sit beneath some greater spiritual reality waiting to be rescued from its physicality. The physical is one of the places where greater order can become accountable to expression. A truth that cannot enter relationship remains incomplete as a lived truth, just as compassion that cannot encounter inconvenience has not yet revealed the extent of its capacity. The golden ray does not make Earth less earthly. It allows consciousness to discover how much coherence earthly life can actually bear without ceasing to be earthly. And this brings the teaching toward a more demanding question than whether greater consciousness exists, whether higher orders can be contacted, or whether moments of expanded awareness are real. The more consequential question is what happens when greater coherence enters limitation voluntarily and refuses to abandon the encounter when limitation begins pressing back. What happens when consciousness does not use its vastness to escape particularity, but allows particularity to teach it forms of patience, fidelity, responsibility, and relationship that abstraction could never require. Because once embodiment is understood not as the imprisonment of consciousness, but as one of the ways consciousness discovers what it can become capable of carrying, the meaning of the golden ray begins opening into something larger still. Limitation does more than test consciousness. It creates forms of meaning that unlimited possibility cannot produce in the same way. A promise matters because you could break it. Care requires weight because your time, attention, energy, and resources are finite, and giving them somewhere means they cannot simultaneously be given everywhere. Even presence becomes meaningful because a human life cannot stand beside every person at every moment. The boundaries that seem to restrict love are also among the conditions that allow love to become specific. This is easy to miss when expansion is treated as the primary measure of spiritual development. Expansion feels like more awareness, more possibility, more connection, more perspective. more freedom from boundaries that once seemed absolute. Embodiment often asks for something that feels like less. This body, this afternoon, this conversation, this responsibility, this person standing in front of you. Yet consciousness may discover capacities through this narrowing that cannot be discovered through expansion alone. To choose one place to stand is not necessarily to lose the whole. Sometimes it is how the whole becomes capable of acting somewhere. Consider how different it is to love humanity and to remain present with one person whose suffering you cannot fix. The first can be sincere, but it can remain largely within perception and feeling. The second places love inside duration, uncertainty, repetition, and helplessness, where there may be no dramatic moment of resolution to confirm that your presence mattered. You listen again, arrive again, adjust again, forgive again, and perhaps receive very little evidence that anything extraordinary is occurring. Yet this is precisely how a principle that once existed as an ideal begins acquiring earthly structure. The golden ray can therefore be understood as a movement from universality into particularity without the universal being lost. A wider coherence does not become corrupted merely because it enters a small action. It may become more complete as expression because the action introduces consequences that abstraction could never contain. Compassion expressed toward everyone in principle encounters little resistance. Compassion expressed toward the person who wounded your pride must pass through memory, emotion, self-protection, judgment, and choice. The principle has not become smaller by entering these conditions. It has become embodied enough to discover what it can withstand. This helps explain why embodiment is rarely as dramatic as people would expect transformation to be. Much of it occurs beneath the threshold at which a person would think to call something spiritual. You interrupt yourself before repeating an old cruelty, admit that you were wrong without constructing a defense, notice that exhaustion is making you harsh and choose not to make someone else carry it, or remain quiet long enough to hear what another person is actually saying. No radiant event announces that consciousness has entered matter. The evidence is that an old pattern was available and something more coherent became possible instead. Over time, these moments begin forming structure. The person who repeatedly interrupts defensiveness becomes increasingly capable of recognizing defensiveness while it is forming rather than only after damage has been done. The person who repeatedly chooses honesty begins requiring less internal negotiation to tell the truth because identity itself is reorganizing around the behavior. What initially required tremendous attention can eventually become a more natural expression of character. This is one of embodiment's quiet mechanisms. Consciousness does not merely instruct behavior from above. Repeated behavior gradually changes what the embodied person is prepared to express. There is humility in this process because insight does not exempt anyone from repetition. You may understand forgiveness completely and still need years before a particular wound stops organizing your reactions. You may recognize intellectually that control cannot guarantee safety, while discovering that your body reaches for control whenever uncertainty becomes intense. This gap between recognition and capacity is sometimes interpreted as failure, but it can be understood more accurately as distance still being crossed. The golden ray does not condemn that distance. It illuminates where understanding has not yet become inhabitable. That distinction also protects spiritual language from becoming a disguise. It is possible to describe yourself through qualities you admire rather than qualities you consistently embody. Someone can speak beautifully about compassion while treating disagreement as evidence of another person's inferiority. Speak of sovereignty while refusing accountability, or speak of unity while requiring everyone around them to validate the same interpretation of reality. The language may be sincere, because human beings are often sincere about who they are trying to become. But Earth continually asks the quieter question: what happens through you when reality refuses to cooperate with your self-description? This is not an invitation to judge every imperfect reaction as evidence that nothing has changed. Embodiment is not perfection, and coherence is not emotional sterilization. A coherent person can become angry, frightened, confused, exhausted, jealous, overwhelmed, or deeply hurt because physical and psychological life continues producing real responses to real conditions. The difference appears increasingly in what happens next. whether an emotion becomes unquestioned authority, whether pain is transmitted automatically, whether responsibility remains possible while the nervous system is activated. Greater coherence does not necessarily remove weather from the inner world. It changes the relationship between weather and action. Nature again offers a useful correction. Stability in a living system does not mean nothing moves. Trees bend, rivers flood, populations fluctuate, bodies develop fevers, seasons interrupt one another, landscapes burn and regenerate, and organisms continuously respond to changing conditions. Living coherence is adaptive rather than frozen. A person who believes spiritual maturity means remaining permanently calm may become less coherent by suppressing every signal that disturbs the appearance of calm, while someone capable of moving honestly through disturbance may preserve a deeper order. This matters because suppression can resemble transcendence from a distance. Detachment can sometimes be wisdom, but it can also be avoidance that has learned spiritual vocabulary. Peace can emerge from genuine integration, or it can be the numbness of someone who has stopped allowing life to reach them. Non-attachment can create freedom from compulsive possession, but it can also become reluctance to love anything deeply enough that its loss would matter. The Aurielic movement asks whether greater consciousness makes you less available to earthly relationship or more capable of entering it without needing relationship to guarantee your safety. To enter fully means accepting vulnerability as part of embodiment. If you care for something physical, it can change. If you love someone embodied, they can leave, misunderstand you, grow differently than you expected, become ill, or die. If you build something, time can alter it. If you devote yourself to community, the community can disappoint you. If you steward a landscape, you may never live long enough to see the full consequence of what you planted. Physical participation offers no contract promising that sincere consciousness will be protected from impermanence, and yet impermanence may be one of the conditions that make stewardship meaningful. You care for something not because you can possess its future, but because you are present during a portion of its existence. A person plants a tree whose mature canopy may shade people they will never meet, teaches something they may never see another person use, repairs a relationship without knowing how long the relationship will last, or protects a place that belonged to generations before them and may belong to generations afterward. The action extends beyond possession. Consciousness enters time, accepts that it cannot control the whole trajectory, and participates anyway. Here the golden ray begins moving beyond individual embodiment into collective structure. If coherence can become embodied through a person, it can also become embodied through what people build together. A school, household, workplace, neighborhood, technology, economic practice, garden, institution, or cultural norm can carry patterns that make certain forms of relationship easier and others more difficult. Human beings do not express consciousness only through private states. They embed assumptions into environments and systems that continue influencing behavior after the original choice has passed. Matter remembers in this practical sense, because what is built today becomes part of the conditions encountered tomorrow. This is why transformation cannot remain entirely internal if it is to become earthly. If your understanding of interdependence never changes how you see resources, organize work, treat vulnerable people, construct incentives, care for shared spaces, or respond to consequences that extend beyond your immediate view, then part of the understanding remains without architecture. A society can speak about human dignity while building systems that repeatedly reward the violation of dignity. A community can value belonging while structuring participation so that only certain people are consistently heard. Coherence becomes collective when principles acquire forms capable of surviving beyond the mood of the people who first recognize them. The crystalline image becomes more useful here because structure influences transmission. An ordered system does not need every component to perform the same function. It requires relationships through which different functions can contribute without continually destroying one another's capacity to participate. Human systems become more coherent, not when everyone becomes identical, but when difference can move through structures that preserve dignity, accountability, reciprocity, adaptation, and meaningful consequence. The quality of a system is therefore not revealed only by what it claims to value. It is revealed by what its organization repeatedly produces. This brings responsibility into the teaching without turning responsibility into guilt. Once consciousness recognizes that it participates through structure, ordinary choices stop appearing entirely isolated. How you speak influences relational environments. How you consume participates in material systems. What you normalize affects what others must navigate. What you build creates conditions that someone else may inherit. No individual controls the entire field of consequence, and pretending otherwise produces paralysis rather than wisdom. But neither is an individual absent from that field simply because the whole is larger than them. Perhaps this is why earthly embodiment can feel simultaneously small and immense. You are given only a narrow portion of reality to directly influence, yet the quality of your participation enters relationships whose consequences continue beyond your sight. You may never know which sentence prevented someone from surrendering to despair, which habit taught a child what respect feels like, which boundary interrupted a pattern moving through generations, or which ordinary act of care became part of another person's understanding of what human beings can be. The golden ray does not require you to know the reach of every action. It asks whether the place you actually occupy is becoming capable of carrying what you claim to recognize. Then the desire to escape Earth begins giving way to a different curiosity. Instead of asking how consciousness can become free of limitation, you begin asking what consciousness can create because limitation exists. Instead of treating the body as temporary packaging, you begin noticing the extraordinary precision through which sensation, memory, emotion, action, relationship, and environment continuously shape one another. Instead of imagining matter as the opposite of spirit, you begin seeing physical existence as a domain in which understanding can acquire duration, responsibility, and consequence. And once that possibility is taken seriously, an even deeper question appears. If consciousness becomes earthly through what it repeatedly inhabits, then perhaps Earth itself is not merely the location of embodiment, but an active participant in teaching consciousness how to belong here. Belonging changes the question because belonging is different from occupancy. You can occupy a place while remaining psychologically elsewhere, treating your surroundings as temporary conditions to endure until something more meaningful begins. Human beings can do this with cities, relationships, bodies, entire stages of life, and even incarnation itself. But when consciousness belongs somewhere, it begins allowing the needs, limits, rhythms, and realities of that place to participate in shaping how it lives. To belong to Earth, then, would mean more than accepting that you currently have a body here. It would mean allowing physical existence to matter enough that your spirituality becomes accountable to what physical existence requires. Sleep matters, food matters, touch matters, ecosystems matter, shelter matters, labor matters, grief matters, and the quality of relationships between embodied beings matters. None of these become less important because consciousness may extend beyond them. If anything, a wider awareness should increase the depth with which the immediate conditions of life are perceived. This is where transcendence can quietly become a form of refusal. If every difficulty is interpreted primarily as something to rise above, the person may never ask what the difficulty is teaching them about participation. Grief becomes something to release, conflict something to transcend, limitation something to overcome, and attachment something to dissolve before each has been understood in its full relational meaning. Yet grief can reveal the depth of love, conflict can reveal where two realities have not learned how to meet, limitation can reveal what deserves priority, and attachment can reveal where a relationship has become entangled with possession or fear. Rising above an experience too quickly can prevent consciousness from receiving what could only be learned by remaining near it. The golden ray asks for a different courage, the courage to stay. Stay long enough for insight to lose its novelty and become disciplined. Stay long enough for love to encounter repetition, for patience to encounter inconvenience, for conviction to encounter ambiguity, and for compassion to encounter someone who does not reward it. Stay long enough for the beautiful thing you recognized in a moment of clarity to meet the ordinary mechanisms of your life. What remains after that meeting tells you something more important than what you were capable of feeling at the height of the experience. There is a particular dignity in this kind of staying, because it does not require the person to appear spiritually exceptional. Much of mature embodiment may look completely unremarkable from outside. Someone keeps a commitment when breaking it would be easier, tends a garden they will never control, apologizes before resentment hardens, rests before exhaustion becomes cruelty, or gives another person enough attention to discover that their first interpretation was wrong. These actions do not advertise expanded consciousness, yet they may express it more reliably than experiences that are far easier to describe as sacred. The earthly quality of the golden ray is found precisely here. Gold does not need to mean spectacle. It can represent coherence becoming durable enough to enter use. Something precious becomes more consequential when it can withstand contact, pressure, repetition, and time without immediately losing the qualities that made it valuable. In a person, that durability appears when understanding remains accessible after inspiration fades. The light has become earthly when it no longer requires you to leave ordinary life in order to find it. This also changes the way spiritual progress might be recognized. Progress may not always feel like becoming more powerful, perceptive, peaceful, or certain. Sometimes it appears as becoming easier to correct, slower to dehumanize, less compelled to win every disagreement, more able to tolerate not knowing, and increasingly willing to repair what your own behavior has damaged. These capacities rarely produce the exhilaration associated with revelation, but they alter the field around a person because other people can actually live differently in relationship with them. That relational consequence matters. If your spiritual development makes everyone around you responsible for protecting your identity as an awakened, enlightened, conscious, chosen, advanced, or unusually perceptive person, then development may have become organized around self-preservation. Greater coherence should gradually reduce the amount of distortion required to maintain an image of oneself. You can be mistaken without collapsing, challenged without automatically attacking, praised without needing praise to continue, and unseen without treating invisibility as proof that others are incapable of recognizing your value. The person becomes more inhabitable because their identity requires less constant reinforcement from the environment. This is another meaning of crystalline order. Structure becomes clear enough that pressure can move through it without every disturbance becoming fracture, not because the person is invulnerable, but because the relationships between their values, perceptions, emotions, and behavior have become less contradictory. Pain can be acknowledged without immediately becoming accusation. Uncertainty can be admitted without manufacturing answers. Desire can be felt without automatically becoming entitlement. Coherence is not the absence of internal movement, but an increasing capacity for different movements to remain in relationship. The same principle appears throughout the living world. A healthy ecosystem does not prevent every disruption. It contains relationships through which disruption can be absorbed, responded to, and sometimes transformed. Diversity contributes to resilience because no single form is required to perform every function, and renewal often depends upon interactions too distributed for one participant to control. Human beings frequently admire nature's complexity while imagining spiritual coherence as simplification. Yet perhaps nature is showing that mature order can become more complex precisely because relationship has become capable of supporting complexity. This has implications of how humanity imagines cosmic harmony itself. If harmony is projected as perfect sameness, permanent agreement, or the disappearance of tension, then earthly difference will always appear deficient by comparison. But if harmony means differentiated participation within larger orders of relationship, then Earth is not necessarily far from the principle being sought. Every functioning body already coordinates trillions of differentiated activities without requiring every cell to become identical. Every forest demonstrates that belonging to a whole does not erase particular function, and every human relationship that survives honest difference demonstrates the same principle at another scale. The Aurielic movement, therefore, does not bring a foreign order into a disorderly planet as though Earth were waiting to be corrected by something superior. It recognizes patterns already present and participates in their refinement. The mineral world holds structure. Biological life holds adaptation. Ecosystems hold reciprocity. Bodies hold coordinations. And human communities hold the possibility of conscious cooperation across difference. Wider coherence meets these existing capacities rather than replacing them. The golden ray becomes earthly by entering relationship with what Earth already knows how to do. This is why stewardship belongs naturally within the teaching. You care differently for something when you stop regarding it merely as the stage upon which your personal awakening occurs. The river is no longer scenery for contemplation. The animal no longer a symbol placed here to deliver a message. The forest no longer a metaphor whose primary purpose is to teach you something about yourself. They possess their own trajectories, relationships, needs, and forms of participation. Reverence matures when the world is permitted to exist for more than your interpretation of it. The same maturation can occur between people. Another person is not merely a mirror for your wounds, a lesson assigned to your growth, a frequency to accept or reject, or a character appearing so that your consciousness can evolve. They possess an interiority that exceeds the role they play in your story. Their experience may contradict your interpretation of the relationship, and their autonomy may lead them somewhere your preferred spiritual narrative did not predict. To honor consciousness in another person means allowing them to remain real even when their reality complicates yours. This may be one of embodiment's deepest disciplines because it prevents spiritual understanding from quietly becoming another form of possession. You cannot truly honor difference while insisting that every difference eventually confirms your framework. You cannot claim relationship with the whole while granting reality only to those expressions of the whole that resemble your expectations. Coherence becomes larger when it can encounter what it did not anticipate without immediately needing to absorb, dismiss, convert, or explain it away. The golden ray is not weakened by plurality. It becomes more capable of inhabiting Earth through it. And then embodiment begins to reveal something that transcendence alone could easily overlook. Perhaps consciousness does not enter matter merely to demonstrate that it can remember what lies beyond matter. Perhaps it enters because relationship with limitation generates something that cannot be produced by remaining unlimited. Fidelity requires duration. Courage requires vulnerability. Stewardship requires something that can be harmed. Forgiveness requires a history that cannot simply be erased. And responsibility requires actions whose consequences matter. These are not merely obstacles consciousness encounters on its way back to freedom. They may be capacities consciousness develops because it agreed to become consequential. This possibility gives physical life a different dignity. Your body is not important because it will last forever. It is important because through it, choices can become actions. Relationships are not meaningful because they are guaranteed permanence. They are meaningful because finite beings can choose how to meet one another while they are here. Earth does not need to become eternal in order to be sacred. Impermanence may be part of what allows presence to become precious enough that consciousness must decide how it will use the time it has been given. Then the golden ray ceases to describe light coming down from somewhere else and begins describing a meeting. Wider awareness meets the intelligence of matter. Possibility meets limitation. Universality meets particularity. Consciousness meets consequence. Neither side needs to defeat the other for coherence to emerge. The larger movement is expressed through their relationship, and what appears is neither consciousness untouched by Earth nor Earth emptied of its density, but something capable of carrying both. You can feel how differently this places the human being within the picture. You are not standing between a lower world you must escape and a higher world you must earn. You are standing at an intersection where what you perceive can become what you practice, where what you value can become what you build, and where what you understand can acquire enough structure to affect lives beyond your own. Every day offers material for that meeting because embodiment does not wait for unusual states. It occurs wherever consciousness is asked to become specific. So perhaps the most revealing question is no longer how much light you can receive. It is how much truth your relationship can carry, how much compassion your behavior can sustain, how much uncertainty your integrity can survive, and how much awareness can enter the structures of your ordinary life without becoming merely another idea you admire. The answer will not be found only in what you believe about consciousness, but in what repeatedly becomes possible through you. And as that possibility deepens, The golden ray begins pointing beyond the individual once more, toward what might happen when enough embodied lives stop trying to leave Earth spiritually and begin discovering what greater coherence could become when it learns fully how to live here.
If this transmission resonated, the spiral continues. You did not arrive here by chance, and you do not leave unchanged. More teachings are unfolding across the Vaharat library, each one meeting you where you are, not where you think you should be. Follow resonance. The next threshold is already listening.